Davos. The gods were watching, and he was ashamed in their sight. May the mother forgive me, Davos Seaworth thought as he lowered his trousers. Maria, too. White roots had grown down into the room, burrowing in and out of the ceiling's black earth. In the flickering light, they seemed to move, twisting and squirming like giant maggots in a slab of rotten meat. Laughing maggots. There were tiny faces etched into the roots, hundreds of them giggling grotesquely overhead, gawking with weeping eyes, mocking, leering. Davos could not put them out of mind, so he settled for out of sight, fixing his eyes on the girl's breasts instead. He fumbled with her bodice. The knots had been done tight, and the shortened fingers on his left hand were all but useless. After a hard tug, a lace finally broke, and her breasts spilled into the open air. He wasn't the least aroused. The girl was no beauty, though Davos had lain with uglier women in his meaner days. He recalled an Ibanese girl with hair on her chest, and a crone from Gulltown, old enough to be his grandmother, and a one-eyed whore at the Happy Port in Bravos. They'd been what a smuggler could afford. Why did I rise for them, and not for this one? Davos knew the answer. He'd betted all those before the mother had spoken to him. Now he was turning a deaf ear to her voice. The bonds of marriage were sacred to the seven gods, the mother most of all. Yet here he was, setting them aside to serve these damned trees. It's the gates of Dragonstone again. He was letting the gods burn. The room smelled as it had that night, of smoke. The odor came from the furnace, which piped warm air throughout the castle, and whose chimney wasn't far from the room's high window. Its hearth was fed with unicorn dung, he'd been surprised to learn, and a dozen of those shaggy beasts could even now be heard, snorting and nickering as they grazed above. Moonlight shone through the high window and silvered the maid's features. Davos searched them for something fair, something to excite him. Her cheeks were well pimpled, as too were her shoulders and breasts. She had a pug nose, thick eyebrows, and crooked teeth that protruded well beyond her lips. Those lips were thin and cracked, and the upper one was hairy, like Queen Salice's. Queerly, it was that made his members stir. Was this how Stannis felt when he came to her bed? It was no secret that there was little affection between the king and queen, and even less in the way of lust. Yet both of them had done their duty. Princess Shireen was proof of that. And this was Davos's duty, as the Magnar had insisted. To become the tree requires sacrifices. They have left me incapable. You must act in my stead. There was no other lord at King's House, to be sure. The boy was too young by far, and Robert Glover held no lands. A lord must fulfill the right. Lord. King Stannis had given him that title the day he'd left his dungeon cell. Then rise again, Davos Seaworth, and rise as Lord of the Rainwood. It was in the Age of Heroes that men first practiced the Lord's right to the first night. Though it had been abolished by good Queen Alysanne 2 centuries past, her decree hadn't stamped out the tradition completely. Silver-haired dragon seeds were a common enough sight on Driftmark and Dragonstone, and Arrayne Waters would boast they all shared the blood of gods. There were even whispers that when a young bride had violet eyes, the red crab still claimed his right. But it was no right on Skagos. No, to the Stoneborn, it was a right. Yet if the girl saw this evening as some blessing from the gods, her face hid it well. Does this poor maid despise me? He wondered as she lay back on the mattress. As he climbed into the bed and lay upon her, her eyes looked beyond him, to the roots above. She prefers their faces to mine. He entered her, and she let out a low grunt. Was she as ashamed of this as he was? To her, was he a monster defiling her marriage? Her husband must want to strangle me. Davos would have felt the same if it were his own bride-to-be. Maria. It was a summer long past when Davos had first met her in that smuggler's cove. His skiff was piled high with black-barked lumber purchased from the Tourmaline Brotherhood. Nightwood, they called it, a wood as beautiful as ebony, but far easier to carve, and doubly prized by carpenters. The laws of Westeros had forbidden the tree from entering its ports, along with its leaves, its pods, and its wine, an act of the first King Aerys, who was only half as mad as the second. She had mousy brown hair, and haggled as fiercely as a Dornish fishmonger, but she did it with a smile, and her eyes were kind. Davos was a new captain, and had nowhere to be in haste, so he offered to help carry the wood to her father's workroom, and then accepted an invitation to stay for supper. A fortnight later, he and Marya were wed in a small stone sept by the sea. His bride was beautiful that day, the sunset alive in her hair. His climax came, and the vision he conjured turned to nightmare. Marya went pale, her eyes changed from brown to red. A witch's laugh rang in his ears. "Give me the boy!" With a shudder, Davos opened his eyes again and pulled himself from the girl. His seed leaked out onto the bed, but to him, it was a spreading, sickly green. Wildfire. It moved. At once it crawled up his leg, to his torso, then to his neck, his face. It was smothering him, pouring into his nostrils and mouth. He was drowning. Davos wanted to scream, but his own voice wouldn't come. Instead, he heard only the wails of his sons. Diehl, Allard, Mathos, Merrick. And then they were gone. The next he knew, he was wandering. It was a listless shuffle through the sunken corridors of King's House, his boots crunching on dirt and gravel and root. The tunnels seemed endless, twisting this way and that through the castle's many hollow hills. King's House was called a motte and bailey, but there was little above the earth, save for the trees and some grazing land for the livestock. Much and more was hidden below, hundreds of passages and chambers, and he'd been told there were still more levels underneath, the tunnels going deeper and colder, then warmer again. He passed door after door, every one oaken and time-worn, and all looking much alike. Only the faces on the roots differed, but none of them looked familiar anymore. He supposed he'd ventured far from his room, but even of that he could not be certain. How long had he been walking? Without the sky overhead, he'd been losing all his sense of time. Davos had freedom of the castle. It was a kindness easily granted. There was nowhere to escape to. Lord Greel Magnar ruled King's House, and King's House controlled the only true port on the island. That damned ice, he thought miserably. We'd be back with Stannis already without it. He reached for his bag of finger bones, but he'd lost it with the rest of his luck. Their destination had been set back in Newcastle. The boy Wex had snatched up a driftwood cup and pounded on a table, and it was Lord Wyman who'd riddled out the mute's meaning. Rickon Stark had fled to a keep called Driftwood Hall on Skagos. It seemed Wex had heard the wildling woman speak of it while he was hiding up in Winterfell's heart tree. Driftwood Hall was the seat of House Stain. Sailors knew it as the only place on the island for trade, and the small folk were friendly enough at that. To reach them was no easy feat, however. A nearby river ran slow and deep, but a petty squabble over lands had led to House Kroll claiming that harbor for themselves. And as for the Krolls, if the Stains were the best of the Skags, the Krolls of Deepdown were the worst. Or so it was said. The tales told of raiders, cannibals, rapers of men alive or dead. Davos didn't know the truth himself, but he remembered Roro Uhoris's words from when they'd sailed past the isle long ago. The woods by the river are thick, and woods are like beards they are. The blind bastard had stroked his own green whiskers as he spoke. Most of us have them, but handsome men don't. Have you noticed that? That's because they're for hiding ugly things. Davos Seaworth had sailed on the morning tide from White Harbor, accompanied by Robert Glover Wex Pike, and a dozen Manderley sailors. A fortnight later, the Isle of Skagos had peaked above the horizon. Under black sails in the dark of night, their cog had slipped between those dense woods and well up the infamous river. He had scratched his beard nervously. But in the end, no attack ever came. They were 5 leagues from Driftwood Hall before the waters thinned, and from there, they'd made the rest of the journey on foot. Finding the keep was easy enough, and within it was the proof of Wex's tale. The boy lord and his wildling guardian were here and hale and healthy. Honored guests of the castle's master they were, though the old man must have worried that harboring them would draw Roose Bolton's ire. When the spearwife agreed to return to the mainland, the master had toasted the hand and ordered an honor guard to return them to their ship. The mission had been one good fortune after another, and so Davos had already been on edge. Too much luck. When winds are fair for too long, expect a storm. Sure enough, before they'd even left Driftwood Hall, the skies had darkened and the snow had begun to fall. Davos never thought he could feel colder than he had at Eastwatch by the Sea, but Skagos had taught him better. When they got back to the river, it was already frozen over, trapping their cog right there in the ice. That damned ice, Davos thought for the 1000th time. It was the ice that had forced them to King's House, the only true port on the Isle of Skagos, the only one that wouldn't be frozen till spring. And for the use of that port, he'd had to treat with the Magnar. A smuggler's life is only 1 part tricker for every 9 parts dicker, the blind bastard would say. It was true. Bribes and bargains were how most forbidden goods were trafficked, not on a smuggler's skiff, and it was a haggler's wit that guarded a sailor when he was caught dead to rights. In the end, Roro's tongue hadn't been nimble enough to save his life. When Davos saw his head roll across the deck of the Cabalcat, he had resolved to be quicker than his old captain. And he had been. Over the years, he had talked his way into his own ship, and into a family, and out of a dozen prison cells. He had talked his way into a knighthood, and into a lordship, and out of the Red Woman's fire. But no amount of talking had kept him from the right. The Magnar had listened to it all with solemn patience, only to tell him again what he had to do. The corridor snaked to the right, and now Davos could hear distant music. The celebration, he remembered. How had he forgotten? It was a wedding feast and a farewell feast in one. He should have been joyous. They would finally depart this cursed isle. Perhaps if he never spoke of it, the memory of this evening would vanish from his mind. A drink could help with that. He quickened his pace. The great hall was crowded with skags and heavy with the smell of unicorn. It was their foal's meat that had been prepared for the feast, lightly roasted and rare, served in a sauce of their mother's milk turned pink. Around the platters of meat were other dishes known only to those of the island. Green lobsters stuffed with cheese and seaweed, huge mushrooms black as polished jet and bathed in butter, and shark soaked in its own urine and fermented for 3 moons. There was nothing so bad as human flesh, but some of the dishes made Davos's stomach turn. Pale grubs steamed and salted, huge brown spiders fried to a crisp, and a bitter mash made from the acorns of werewoods, with dark veins in it red as blood. The mash must have been Lord Greel's favorite. Beyond a sea of unicorn pelts, the Magnar shoveled spoonful after spoonful into his mouth, barely taking the time to breathe. The Lord of King's House was an obese man, even fatter than Lord Manderley, with pale and pock-marked flesh. His head was completely bald, but Davos supposed he had once been red-headed. A few clumps of crimson hair sprouted from his double chin. His knees were too weak for him to walk on his own, so he went everywhere with his guards, clad in their rust-dark armor. They acted as his legs, often carrying him on a palanquin of wood and bone. Beside the Magnar on the dais sat the Lord of Winterfell, Rickon Stark, sucking the marrow from a unicorn bone. The boy's direwolf was in the kennel. By his side they had seated the spearwife Osha, glowering impatiently as she usually did. Further down, Robert Glover hadn't touched the meat set before him, and was instead studying the wax tablet that Wex had taken to writing on. The mute boy had been seated with the Manderley men, but left his place to show off his latest scribblings. The place of honor at Lord Greel's right hand was empty. It was reserved for the king's hand, Davos knew, once I performed the rite. Servants stepped aside to allow the Lord of Rainwood to take his place upon the dais. "My lord hand returned at last. Thank the gods." The music was loud, but the Magnar's voice cut through it. He wiped acorn mash from his lips, missing a bit of red at the corner. "Your cup is filled? Good, good. You were gone for some time. Did you fall asleep?" "I must have." The nightmare still rankled him. "Aye, but it's done," Davos said curtly. "My part, at least." Their agreement was a great victory, hard as it was to stomach. Lord Greel had pledged his fealty to Stannis, and consented to deliver Lord Rickon Stark to the king's cause at White Harbor. With that, all of Skagos was Stannis's. House Kroll agreed to release sailors they'd captured, survivors from 2 of Salador Sand's wrecked galleys, and the Magnar declared all but one of his ships were the king's to commandeer until war's end. Further, the houses of the Isle pledged 1,000 men-at-arms, 100 archers, and 200 riders mounted atop their fiercest war unicorns. In return, the Hand of the King promised that neither the Iron Throne nor Winterfell would collect taxes from Skagos for the next 15 years. Davos doubted whether they planned to pay come the 16th, but what was that to him? Other tokens of alliance had been necessary in the meantime. Robert Glover agreed that his daughter would wed one of Lord Greel's sons once she flowered, with the choice among them left to her. The king's hand likewise promised his son Stefan to one of the Magnar's daughters when he came of age, though in this case the Lord of King's House would choose the bride. But there were more peculiar requests. Lord Greel demanded a great tapestry be woven in his honor, at least 20 feet wide, to be displayed in Stannis' throne room for all the court to see. Further, every 3 moons, a shipment of Dornish blood oranges was to be delivered directly to King's House, paid for entirely by Lord Wyman Manderley, and not King Stannis, though the Magnar would not explain this provision. Finally, and of paramount importance, there was the Lord's Rite. Every year, the king would send a lord to Skagos to take part in the ritual, and Davos would be the first. Stannis could hardly have hoped for better terms. Shouldn't his hand be proud of the bargain he'd struck? After all, what had he truly sacrificed? Pride? Faith? A wedding vow he'd broken 100 times before. Compared to what he'd given at the Blackwater, it was a pander's sum. After a loud belch, the Magnar signaled his guards, and they rushed to his side. It took 3 of them, all grunting with the effort, but eventually they got their lord to his feet. Though it obviously pained him, he stood true on his own, and the effort drew the attention of the whole hall. The room hushed. Then, one of Lord Magnar's sons passed his father a cup, and he raised his arm in a toast. "My children of stone," the Magnar sang out. "The cold winds rise, and soon winter will be upon us. For the nonce, enjoy the sun, and feast in its dying rays. For soon all color will flee, save what blooms in the rot. I implore you, bring in your herds, and call in your kin, and we will all descend beneath the ground, into the stone, into the trees, together. For it is here we will be sheltered from the night. Through our ceilings, the worms and roots will watch over us. Through our floors, hell's fires will warm us. And I shall take my place on the Green Seer's throne, to guide us through this long and difficult age, the age of darkness. Offerings will be made, and the gods will smile on them. They will smile on us too, like mothers on their unborn children, as they wonder what they dream of in the dark. So let us dream, and await the rosy dawning of our new name day." The hall erupted in cheers. They pounded all the tables, and someone blew a unicorn horn. "Stone-born! Stone-born! Stone-born!" When the chant subsided, the Lord smiled softly. But not all of us are for the dreaming. There is a war in the twilight, and we have made a pact with King Stannis. On the morrow, Lord Rickon will depart for White Harbor. Some of our own will go with him, stone-born that will show the North the mettle of Skagosi. They look down on us as savages, but we will show our true worth. By all the gods we will. More cheers, and then a toast to King Stannis. Davos drank deep. After the guards helped their lord back into his seat, Davos turned to him. His Grace will be pleased with this alliance. I look forward to our next meeting. Perhaps in King's Landing, once Stannis sits the Iron Throne. The Magnar tilted his head. I fear you haven't understood me, Lord Seaworth. Tomorrow's ships will be for Lord Stark and his other companions, but you will remain here. His heart dropped like an anchor. Here? My lord, I need to return to my king. And in time you will. We only need to be sure your seed is quickened. Once the girl has missed her moonblood, your duty will be concluded, and we'll send you to the king's side. Davos was confused. Our agreement was for the Lord's right to be fulfilled. I played my part. Davos felt his anger rising. My damned part. Do you think the most sacred of our rituals is only to sate mere foul desires? No. The gods command it for a higher purpose. Lord Greel shook his head gently, polite in his scorn. The mainlanders have forgotten the old ways. Things are different here. The Stoneborn remember, and have held the right true since the dawn of days, when the first of us crawled naked from the earth. He stopped to study Davos. But how can I expect you to see the truth of our skies, of our rivers, of our trees, when you pray to a god cloistered in a seven-sided box? Mother of mercy. I worship the seven gods, Davos said, indignant, who made us all. All the way from Andalos, did they? The Magnar scoffed, but then grew serious. Lord Bolton is said to keep the old gods. A pity we are at war. Mayhaps he would understand what I say better. Davos stiffened. Careful. We need the boy. He took a breath to calm himself. I'll stay. Until she is without moonblood. The Magnar nodded thoughtfully, then forced a smile. It may be best you tumble the bride tomorrow, and the day after as well. All the sooner to get her with child. That night, Davos woke to pounding at his door. Who? He shared the chamber with Robert Glover and Wex, but both were asleep in their beds. After rubbing the sleep from his eyes, the Onion Knight rose and stumbled to the door. On the other side of it stood the wildling, bundled in furs. My Lord Seaworth, will you step out with me? Osha asked. Before we sail off, I have something to show you, and you have something to see. How could he say no? After finding his boots and wrapping himself in a thick fur cloak, Davos followed her through the halls of King's House. They made the climb up the central stairs to the main gate. It was open. Davos had yet to see it closed, and the guards only nodded at them as they passed. Nowhere to escape to. They emerged from a tunnel at the edge of the weirwood grove. Outside it was bitter cold, and dark beneath the canopy of leaves. He liked it even less here than he did beneath the earth. At least below, he was warm while the trees watched him. To his relief, the woman moved quickly, and Davos had to follow at a jog. From the grove, they crossed the bailey in silence, past giant shadows that could only be unicorns grazing, then descended down to the port. The stars made the water on the bay shimmer. Waves lapped at the shoreline, pieces of driftwood flowing back and forth in their rhythm. At the dock, bundled Stoneborn guarded the great cogs the Magnar had prepared for the morning tide. Lord Vermalar, Laughing Rhys, and Annalyn's Dream. Davos and Osha followed along the shore. At first their feet fell on black sand, but soon sand became rock, and rock became boulder. When they came to a cliff face, the wildling hoisted herself up the stones of a great tumble, one after the other, until she reached the top. He followed, though nowhere near so swift. the roughness of the basalt stone stinging his cold hands as he climbed. It was flat atop the bluff, and they had a clear view of their surroundings. The weirwood grove, the port, the ocean. Osha walked over to an outcrop of rock that had formed into a 10-foot-high arch. She gave it a sour look, as if its presence offended her. Just the shape of rock, Davos thought, wondering what bothered her so. He had seen the like on Dragonstone. Septon Bar said the smith had his forge far below the earth, with fires so hot they would melt stone into a soup called magma. Now and again, some mountain spewed up that liquid stone, just as a man did his seed, and sometimes the rock would cool in the oddest of shapes. Osha finally spoke. "I told you how I ended up looking after the lordling, no?" She had. Over the past weeks they had shared a number of stories. You came into the Stark service after they captured you. They showed you mercy. Aye, a lordling's mercy for me, and a wolf's mercy for my sister. Davos was taken aback. Your sister? Might be Haley was only my half-sister, but that was enough. She was only half-eaten, and that was enough too. I'm sorry, Osha. Davos had lost a sister of his own, Dora, but it had been a long time ago, and it was far too cold to get into all of that. He wondered why the wildling was telling him this now. It was Haley's plan to get south of the wall. Wasn't much of a plan, truly. We got cozy with some rangers who flew down from Eastwatch and let them do all the work. The Black Crows don't have women, you see, so they're as lonely as striplings, and we let them save us. The Lord of Bones is after us, we cried. And you Southerners are always looking to play at being knights. I am a knight, he might have said. But instead he said only, I. Our crows in love were Stiv and Wallen. Wallen's voice annoyed me, so Haley took him and convinced him her cousins should come along. Stiv was mine. He was a big fellow who liked that I was smaller than him, but I knew I could kill him if I wanted. You know what got him on the wall? Davos shook his head. Smugglin', Osha grinned. Though Stiv wasn't no lord at it like you. Still, he went and got us a sloop. A stupid name for a boat, but it served. He said Eastwatch was only a danger so far as Cotter Pike could see, so the 6 of us sailed the long way around Skagos. Stiv knew the waters from before he was black, and had traded with the Stains. They have kind souls, the Stains, with no ill will towards free folk or runaways. It's why I took the lordling back there. You met some of them. They love to prattle on, don't they? Retellin' the same stories. Well, they had one tale that was different. About the Magnars. A tale that makes me happy I'm taking the lordling away from here. She walked closer to the stone arch. It's here. Just like they said. He took a step forward to get a better look. The arch was pocked and jagged, much like all the rock around them. It was beautiful in a way, but hardly the stuff of hearth tales. What did they say it was? A gate, she said. A black gate, they called it. And do you know what's past them waves? Through the stone arch, all he could see were sea and stars. That's the ice dragon to our right, which means we face northwest. Past the horizon is the Isle of Skane, and beyond that, north of the wall. The sailor knows his maps. Aye, it's the true north, my home. The Magnar sails from here, landing on Storald's Point. My people have spied his sails. Black sails, smugglers' sails. He trades on the point, but not with the free folk. Davos had seen Storald's Point with his own eyes when he served on the Cobblecat. Who then? Osha shrugged. Giants have no need for unicorn horns when mammoth tusks prove better, and the children of the forest have more dragonglass blades than hands to wield them. No. He trades with the White Walkers. The others. Somehow Davos felt even colder. He had heard talk at Eastwatch of whites, and Melisandre was certain King Stannis was destined to battle something darker. The Great Other, she called it. But the monsters of songs? It was hard to believe, even for a man who'd seen shadows come to life. He stared long and hard into the sea. What would the Magnar want from them? Or they from him? There's a man in the north named Craster, if you'd call him a man. Osha spat. Shunned by the free folk for lying with his kin, but the Black Crows don't think him all that bad. Or they don't think his hearth is all that bad. Stiv even met him. Said he had 24 daughters, and just as many wives. But no sons. No sons. It was an odd thing to have so many children of a kind. Davos himself had 7 sons, which men said was well past lucky. But he'd rarely spoken about his misfortunes. There'd been 2 daughters as well, each stillborn. He'd always planned to name a daughter Dora, but the day had never come. These boys, what are you saying happened to them? Osha looked exhausted with him. You lose your ears with your seed, Lord Smuggler. She shook her head. Go back to Driftwood Hall if you want to hear the same story over and over. She started the trek back to King's house without him. When Davos got back to his chambers, he found Robert Glover and Wex still sleeping. Light streamed in from the hallway as he removed his cloak and boots. It was then he spied the wax tablet, resting on a carved wooden table. He'd forgotten it till now, but he was curious to know. What had Wex written at the feast? What had Glover read? Davos took the tablet in hand and read it for himself. Kin, he sounded out, whisper quiet. Kinslayer. The next morning, his companions took ship for White Harbor. Hundreds of Stoneborn sailed with them, packed onto the Magnar's 3 cogs. It would take 3 trips to sail the whole army to White Harbor, Davos figured, and he wondered whether he would join any of them. I'm trapped here for a moon's turn, he reminded himself. Mayhaps 2 or 3. There was time. Too much of it. Sailors were no strangers to idle days. How many of his had been whiled away beneath limp sails? But when the sea was windless, he had the luxuries of dice and tiles and the gossip of the men. On Skagos, he had only himself. And poor enough company that is. Alone, the tunnels filled his days. There were scores of them to explore, and as he walked, he made a game of it, finding faces in the roots that resembled men he'd known. Davos spotted one with a yellowish hue and dubbed it lamprey. A plump little root near his chambers he named Lord Bar Emmon. And there was the thin one outside the armory, the one with the wide laugh. It's good to see you, Sala. Deeper boredom led to deeper ventures. There were darker levels to King's house that only a few servants called home. Deeper still, levels where no Stoneborn lived at all, and they didn't waste the oil to light the torches along the walls. Davos took to carrying his own. The roots were faceless this far down, and the rooms were doorless and empty. Still, the burrows sprawled on and on and on, like an ant colony long since abandoned. On his deepest descent yet, the corridors shifted from packed earth to solid stone. Here and there he found sigils carved into the walls, stripes and circles that looked more like runes than heraldry. Curiously, there was no lobster of House Magnar, nor any other sigil he knew. As he leaned close to inspect them further, he stumbled over a stone and dropped his torch. "Oh, Mother, have mercy!" The torch rolled and sputtered out. It was black. Endlessly black. For a moment, panic gripped him. "So you have come to love the fire," a voice whispered in his mind. Ignoring the thought, Davos advanced with his arm out until he found the wall. It was warm and rough and reassuring in his grasp. "I don't need the torch," he told himself. "Follow the wall back." So he did, letting his shortened fingers skim the stone as he went along. As he walked slowly on towards nothing, he sometimes thought he heard sounds around him, scrapes and scurries, but though he stilled himself and strained his ears, he could never be sure if he had imagined them. After what felt like an entire day's slow, blind march, finally, Davos saw the dim light of an upper level spilling down into a stairwell ahead. When he ascended to the top level, he was dripping with sweat. "You find Gorn's way down there," a guard chortled at him, slapping him on the back. Davos burst into relieved laughter, though he couldn't say who Gorn was. On the 23rd day was the second launching. Through the steam of his breath, Davos watched hundreds of Stoneborn sail off again without him. Part of him had hoped he would be allowed aboard, but it was a foolish thought. Even if the bride was with child, and suspected as much, she could not be certain. Not yet. The Moonblood might only be late. And what if she isn't with child? He wondered. The Magnar could keep him here for months. What if they fear she will miscarry, and keep me here till the babe is born? That would make it near a year. He strolled ponderously across the bailey, taking time to marvel at the unicorns digging for grass beneath the snow. The likeness of these beasts made in the south had little truth to them. Contrary to the devices on shields, living unicorns had far less in common with horses than they did with giant boars. They were lumbering beasts, with a heavy hump between the shoulders and goat-like beards that dragged across the ground as they grazed. A thick, shaggy coat made their legs look short and stubby, and their bodies were absurdly round. At least they have the horn. That much was true. It wasn't straight or thin or spiraled, but instead a thick and curved thing, like a giant fang, wide as a man's head at its base, before rising to a point. The Master of Unicorn found him there. Groff was a small man, with short stubble and long grey hair tied back beneath his heavy hood. The two men spoke of the shaggy beasts for the better part of the morning, and Davos learned much and more of their nature. Though slow to start, unicorns could gallop as fast as a horse, but could not jump or move sideways. Their charge was powerful and deadly, making fences useless, and so the bailey was instead surrounded by a great moat, save for by the port. Most importantly, they were bred for winter, staying warm beneath their fur, where a horse would freeze. The women were out collecting the unicorn's dung in great bushel baskets. It was a vital resource, Groff explained, once it dried. The small folk used it for their cooking fires and to heat their hovels and caves. As for the castle, dung fed its furnace, warmed its ovens, and filled each and every hearth. Even the hedge wizards and herb women made use of it, in salves and potions for the sick, and as an incense burned to ward off illness. Groff taught him how to approach a unicorn without spooking it, and before long, he had one eating corn out of his gloved hand. In the afternoon, Davos was shown how to saddle the beast, which was one of the smaller and tamer ones. Soon enough, he had mounted the thing and was off. He and Groff spent the next several days riding together, and Davos could understand the joy of it. He'd never cared for the feel of a horse beneath him, but a unicorn was somehow different. There was not so much of an up and down, the beast instead swaying and rolling like the deck of a ship. And there was a feeling of power to be had atop a beast so large, which made even a beginner's careful canter feel intoxicating. One day they went hawking. It was the first chance he'd ever had to try the sport, on any mount. But isn't it time the Lord of the Rainwood took it up? Groff used a majestic grey goshawk for the hunt, while Davos had been lent a merlin. The Master of Unicorn's bird made Davos remember a story Stannis had told him once. "You prefer the goshawk," Davos observed. "May I ask why?" "His sig is a good bird," said Groff, caressing its plumage. "He flies low and stealthy, and catches more prey than any falcon can in a thick wood. Which do you like?" Davos laughed. "I don't know enough for preferences of my own. I was once told a tale about a goshawk is all. Did the man who told it hawk often?" That made Davos think. "I'd never seen him go, no. But he said he did when he was a boy." Groff sniffed. "My lord, begging your pardon, I find experience begets wisdom, while boys beget folly." "Well said. Mayhaps I should take this grown boy hawking if I see him again, and teach him the truth of the hunt." "Mayhaps. My lord, on the matter of experience, I have a question for you, if you would be so open. It's about Carolee." "Carolee?" Davos gave him an uncertain look. Who? My new wife, Groff returned, just as uncertainly. The Wright's bride. Did you not know her name? Davos was abashed, though in truth he had not wanted to learn it. The less he knew, the easier to forget. We've barely spoken, he admitted. I had no idea she was your wife. Did you have to beat her to get her to perform? The master asked. No, said Davos, nonplussed. She was quite willing to do her duty. Good. Groff seemed relieved. I couldn't get my first wife to perform without threatening the lash. I pray Carolee will serve me better. The third launching came on the 51st day, and with that, the last of the soldiers were off. And once again, Davos was left behind. His seed had yet to quicken, or at least no one had told him if it had. Now, even if tomorrow brought certainty that the bride was with child, it would be weeks before one of the Magnar's ships returned. And what if she's barren? Would he ever leave? He brooded all the way back to the castle gate, where he saw women foraging for mushrooms in the weirwood grove. An old crone waved him over, and he spent the morning learning which of the fungi were edible and which to avoid. Though most of them carried quick death in their caps, Davos found them beautiful, with hues of every color of the rainbow and more besides. One white mushroom released a spore that women powdered their faces with. A green one they pressed for oil to feed the castle's torches. An indigo one, when minced and snorted, brought strength to men's members. I would have had use for that one. When their bushels were full, the women brought him down to the kitchen, where the cooks boasted of their talents at length before showing him how to prepare the hall. Over the following days, they revealed other secrets too. How to fry spiders so they'll be crisp and not chewy. How to make blood bread rise when it bakes. How to render unicorn tallow. And though it nearly made him gag, Davos even learned how to draw fresh milk from the flesh of grubs and worms. One morning in the kitchen, he heard news of the Celsail's arrival. The Krolls had finally delivered the surviving crews of Sallador Sands Oleto and Old Mother's son. There were only a score of them left, and they were dragged forth in manacles and chains, each more gaunt than the last. The lot had obviously been beaten near death. Wrecked on Kroll land, one of the cooks said. It was to be expected. They wouldn't let their shores be dishonored. Davos found Sands men resting in their neat chambers. Their wounds had been treated with dung and bandages, and they were each given a hearty breakfast of mushrooms and sliced unicorn stones. One looked up from his plate. The Onion Knight? Bugger me with Indros's cunt! It was the 76th day when the Magnar summoned Davos. Our efforts have been answered, he said from his weirwood throne. The bride is with child. You have our thanks and our friendship, Lord Seaworth. Tomorrow you may depart. When the sun rose, Davos was already wide awake. As they crossed the bailey, he and the Celsails were flanked on either side by an honor guard. Leading them was none other than the Magnar himself, bundled beneath a thick unicorn cloak, trimmed with sable, and carried high atop his palanquin by 8 men. Wind and water give me strength, Davos prayed. And the mother, too. Out of the corner of his eye, he could already see it. Don't look. Let them call attention to it. But the guards were too focused on the task at hand, making sure not to drop the weight they bore. A unicorn in the bailey snorted and stamped, but still the guards looked only to their lord. At the docks, Annalyn's dream was alive with sailors preparing for the voyage. The captain came to the prow and bowed before his lord, and only then did anyone take notice. The weirwoods! All at once the guards turned and saw the pillar of smoke rising from the grove. A moment later came the crash as they dropped the palanquin, sending the Magnar to the earth with a whimper. Most of the guards left their fallen lord and raced back towards the trees. Davos followed. Across the bailey he could see Stoneborn pouring out of the gates of King's House, buckets in hand, men and women, guards and servants. They screamed commands to one another, well panicked. This way and that they ran, searching for the source of the smoke. None paid him any mind. Reaching the castle, he went straight down into the tunnels. Davos raced through the labyrinth of corridors, remembering the path he'd learned to take. He veered left at Edric Storm's smirk, right at King Stannis' scowl, then left again at Maester Cressen's wince. He spotted Sir Andrew, then ran past Pylos and Lord Godric and Alistair Florent. There was Maria and Wex and Princess Shireen. Melisandre cackled. Queen Selyse frowned. Patchface screamed. Diehl, Allard, Mathos, Merrick. He arrived. Catching his breath, Davos stood before the door. There was a root above that marked it for him, its etched face drawn into a smile. Dora's smile. Inside was the girl, the new bride, the one the Lord of the Rainwood had lain with every night since the feast. Carolee looked at him in confusion, and then with fear. "There's a fire," he said. "Come with me." He grabbed her by the wrist, and she went with him easy enough. They were among smoke and tumult when they emerged from the earth again, so they went unnoticed halfway back to port. Too much luck, he thought. Expect a storm. And sure enough, the girl began to scream. She attacked him suddenly with a fury of blows from her free hand. Davos gave her a hard yank and quickened his pace. Her hand clawed at his face, and he felt a blaze of pain as her nails dug in deep. Davos ripped her hand away, then twisted her body around into a hug that pinned both of her arms. She wriggled violently and bit his shoulder, but his furs were thick, and he could stand it. He hoisted her body off the ground and carried her, her legs kicking in the air. Haru! A unicorn horn blew in the distance. They were coming. His thighs burned as he ran as fast as he could manage. The docks loomed larger, and he could feel the blood streaming down. Warm at first, but colder with every step. I can make it. When he came to the docks, he saw the Magnar still lying on the ground. His throat had been slit. The bodies of guards and sailors were sprawled all about him. The sight sent the bride into a new round of shrieking. Salladhor Sand's men were now the ones readying Annalyn's dream to sail. Armed with the knives Davos had smuggled from the kitchen, they'd overtaken the stone-born crew with ease. Pirates to the bone. Haru! The horn sounded again, and Davos could hear hoofbeats. He hoisted Carolee onto the gangplank, and a pair of sails grabbed her. Others sped to untie the ropes that moored the great cog, just as the first arrows struck the ship's side. As they all raced up the gangplank, another arrow took Davos in the leg. He fell forward, slamming his face into the gunwale. But before he could tumble into the water, a sailor grabbed him by the arm and hurled him up onto the deck. The sails were pulled tight, and the ship lurched forward, sending the gangplank spinning into the water. The ship listed, then hit the dock with a thud that knocked sailors off their feet. "Save me, gentle mother," Davos prayed. His leg burned. His face burned. Hellish sounds were all around him. The ship's side tearing against the dock, arrows piercing the hull, unicorns calling out. "Save me." And then all those terrible sounds drew back, leaving only beautiful ones. The wind and the waves, the squeak of rope and the snap of canvas, the laughter of sailors. For a moment, he forgot all about his pain and simply listened to the song. When he felt it was safe, Davos pulled himself onto a knee and peeked over the gunwale. In the distance, he could see the weirwood grove, still burning. To extinguish the fire would be no small task, not with the wood soaked in mushroom oil and unicorn tallow, and the branches packed so with dung. He and Sala's cell sails had been at work all night. It's the gates of Dragonstone again, Davos Seaworth thought. He was letting the gods burn.